Welcome to All Things Book Fair. My name is Athule Mbekeni and I'm your host for this year's Miami Book Fair. Founded by Miami-Dade College and the community partners, the 35th Miami Book Fair is an 8-day literacy party with more than 450 authors from the United States and around the world. This year's event begins on Sunday, November 11 and ends with a weekend street fair extravaganza beginning on Friday, November 16 until Sunday, November 18. There are events for the entire family, for all ages. This television program will highlight some of the many authors presenting their work at this year's event. My first guest is presenting her new book, Eli's Story, a 20th Jewish Life, which tells the story of a man whose life and memory spanned 2 world wars, several migrations, an educated odyssey, and a massive disruption of the Holocaust. I'm joined by its author, Dr. Meri-Jane Rochelson. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you so much. Dr. Rochelson, this is a story about your father who survived the Holocaust.
Yes.
Now, considering your educational background, how important is the story to you?
Oh, it's extremely important. Regardless of my educational background, I think it's a story that people need to know. I decided to tell this story not just about my father's Holocaust experience, which of course was critical, and everything kind of pivots on that.
Absolutely.
But the subtitle is A 20th-Century Jewish Life because it covers his entire life. He was born in Kovna, Lithuania in 1907, and he died in Brooklyn, New York in 1984. And people are aware of the Holocaust.
Yes.
A lot of young people are not very aware of the Holocaust, but they think of it as a time of death and destruction of people long ago and far away. One of the things that this book shows was that the victims of the Holocaust were people just like us.
And they lived actual lives.
They lived actual modern lives. At one point in the interview on which this is based, an interview that was done by my brother with my father in the 1970s, at one point in the interview, my father mentions his phone number.
Wow.
And yes, I know. I remember thinking, oh my God, they had a phone number. Well, of course they had a phone number. The time he was talking about was 1941. Absolutely. These were modern people living modern lives. My father had just graduated from medical school the year before. He had a young son. He had a wife. They didn't survive. He had a brother who had a wife and child. None of them survived.
Now, your father survived the Holocaust, of course. Mm-hmm. And like you mentioned, his family didn't survive. Was it hard for you to understand his life and pain?
That's a really interesting question. I think so. I mean, I think it had to be. But my father told us a lot about his life throughout the time I was growing up. There were some really important things that he didn't tell us and that I didn't find out till I was a teenager, such as he had a wife and a child. And I talk about finding out about that in this book. But we knew that he came from Europe. We knew that his family had died. And he talked about the persecution. So from the time I was very young, I knew that he had come out of a difficult situation before I was born. But then again, I knew so little about life that I guess, okay, I just kind of understood it. But I remember one thing that I point out is that in the New York City subways, they had these signs about, no spitting, violators will be prosecuted. Mm-hmm. And I thought it said, violators will be persecuted. And I thought you could be killed for spitting in the subway. Oh my God. So that's a sign of what I knew when I was quite young.
Now, I understand that you did research for this book through public archives as well as personal archives.
Yes.
But the core of Eli's story is in his own words.
Yes, it is.
How did you get that information?
Okay. Well, in the mid-1970s, around the time that my brother, Bert Rochelson, graduated from college, He sat my father down and interviewed him and taped the interviews. My father wanted his story to be told. He told us all the time we were growing up, he wanted his story to be a book. So my brother sat with him, and I think it was 6 hours of interviews, which I then transcribed just recently. One of the things that surprised me when I transcribed it was that there was actually very significant information in the interview, which I had heard in the 1970s when I first heard the tapes, that I had forgotten completely.
Wow.
Yeah.
Did you learn any new experiences that your father may have gone through during the research?
Oh, yes. Yes. Well, I learned, this was actually from other materials that we had. We had this diary and letters in German.
Oh, wow.
And I don't go into this in great detail in the book because I really don't know very much about it. But it seems that when my father helped to form the DP Camp Hospital, the Hospital for Displaced Persons at Landsberg am Lech, which was a very large displaced persons camp in Bavaria. And he worked with a doctor named Dr. Solomon Nabrisky, and they set up this hospital. And my father was in charge of the outpatient division. While he was there, he had a relationship with a German nurse who was working there. And my brother had those letters in that diary translated by someone he knew who knows German. And we looked at these and we thought, this is interesting. But we didn't know enough to really go into it in great detail. And that's a story that my brother might work on sometime. Right, exactly. So I don't go too far on it in this book. Other things I learned, this is one of the things I learned that I should have known when listening to the interviews, that my father's mother-in-law, the mother of his wife who was killed, survived. And it was in the interview, and I somehow never processed it until I found her letters. And there were these desperate letters from her that she sent to my uncle who lived in New York, who came in 1912, asking, do you have any information about my son? She called him my son. And my grandson and my daughter. Do you know anything about them? Are they alive? And in other letters, she wrote about dreams she had that her grandson was at the door, things like this. That was all completely new to me. I also learned while doing research, and this was not in the interview material, this was by making contact from another person who was a child in the Kovna ghetto with my first brother, Borya. I knew that Borya had gone to Dachau with my father, Eli, and I knew that at a certain point he was taken away. That was all I knew. Wow. What I found out, though, from a man named Shalom Eilati, who has also written a wonderful book called Crossing the River about his experiences, was that there were actually 131 boys from Kovna who were taken together from Dachau to Auschwitz. And they were kept alive for about 6 weeks. There is various speculation on why. Most of them were killed. Some survived, I think about 30 or so survived, 40 maybe.
How important is it to educate the society about the Holocaust so that we don't repeat the mistakes of the past?
That's why it's important, so that we don't prevent the mistakes, so that we don't perform the mistakes of the past again. And in this day and age, when we're thinking so much about immigration, if American immigration laws had been more favorable, many of the people who were killed in the Holocaust would not have been killed. They would be Americans today. And I think of that when I hear all the news today about immigration, how my father and his family tried very hard to come to this country, and yet the barriers were there and they couldn't. So it's very, very important to know these stories and make sure that this kind of horror never takes place in the world again. And unfortunately, to a certain extent, it has happened in places like Rwanda and places like Cambodia. And we have to be alert to it. We can't just say, this isn't my people. We're all our people.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your story. When we come back, we'll share yet another personal story with somebody with a Miami-Dade connection. So stay tuned.
Welcome to the Miami Book Fair.
It's just so great to be around so many people who love books.
One thing I grew up realizing was the power of language.
Whoa! This is amazing.
I love comic books so much that is what I do for a living.
Welcome back to the show. Robert Huff, Cross Section, an illustrative look at the work of famed artist and former Miami-Dade College art professor Robert Huff, who passed away in 2014. This book is the brainchild of his widow, Barbara Young. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
Well, Barbara, I understand that you worked with Beth Dunlop for this book. Can you tell us why did you decide to work on this book?
We actually started thinking about a book before Bob passed away, and I had been talking with Carol Jazar, who was Bob's dealer at the time, and also with Helen Cohen, who was a very close friend, who was the art critic at the Miami Herald for many years, and with Bob. And the idea began there, and I guess because I'm a librarian by trade, I worked with the Miami-Dade Public Library System many years, and actually the book fair was sort of the concept of some of the people at the library working with Mitchell Kaplan and some of the independent book dealers. And Dr. Bedrone wonderfully took it under his wing and has given it a great home here at the Miami-Dade College. But anyway, books have been always so important to me, and I thought we knew Bob was ill, and I wanted to document his life, and I wanted to do a book, even though there are some people that say, books are passé, but I think if you live in South Florida and you come to the book fair, or you know about Mitchell Kaplan and Books and how many stores he has and stuff like that, books are alive and well in South Florida.
Books are very much important.
Yes.
This book, how long did it take for you to compile all his work into one hardcover book?
He actually had a part in that before he passed away. He he was very organized, and he had always documented his work, so we had slides to work from.
Oh, wow.
And he had created a large notebook, made 4 copies, one for Carol Jazar and one for myself and one for himself, and one as a sort of an index. But we used those notebooks as guides. Things were laid out chronologically. We definitely did not use all the work in the notebooks, but I was very, very fortunate with this book because Bob was a well-known artist, was a very popular artist, and very, very respected.
Absolutely.
And not only at the North Campus, but with people that he showed with over the years and galleries that he worked with over the years. So I had a lot of support. Letter 16 Press, which is an independent press run by Frank Casale and Brett Sokol, who's the arts editor at the Ocean Drive magazine, as well as writes for the New York Times and for the Wall Street Journal and various things. Got involved with me and thought it was a wonderful idea to do. And then we had a lot of information that we compiled over the years. Bob had been interviewed by lots of people, so there were lots of records and reviews and things like that by people like Helen Cohen and Griff Smith and Elisa Turner and Ann Tashida and George Fishman, and we had all that information, plus we had 2 interviews. I did an oral history, about 2-hour interview with just a tapes with Bob.
Oh, wow.
And then Baron Shear, who's a wonderful video artist here in Miami, sat down with Helen Cohen and with Bob and did a 2-hour interview. And so all that information was available for Beth Dunlop, who wrote the beautiful essay for the book, to work with. And then Frank Casale, the designer of the book and one of the principals at Letter 16 Press, rephotographed a lot of the work, and he did the design of the book, and he was very, very sensitive to the work. And Another wonderful photographer here in the area who works primarily with architecture is Stephen Brooke, And Stephen has done lots and lots of books. He's done lots and lots of books with Beth Dunlop, but after Bob had passed away, we were moving things around in the studio, and I was concerned that we document the studio while it still was Bob's work, Bob's studio, his space. And Stephen came over one afternoon and spent several hours and photographed the studio. And those shots of the studio sort of punctuate the shots of the work, which gives it a kind of a nice flow to, see the work and then go back to the artist's space. And so you're really aware of Bob's sense of order and
Now, Mr. Huff's work
Yes.
spans from creativity and provocative. Is there one word to describe his work?
I think that he would struggle with all of those words. It's very hard to describe it. He thought of himself as a person working with landscape, but it was a landscape more and more informed by architecture. And so the early work that is sort of, some of it's sort of whimsical, a lot of it draws from, he loved to fish, he spent a lot of time on the water, in the ocean, and especially in the Everglades and stuff like that. So the textures and the colors and the light of those spaces really informs the early work. And then more and more you see the architecture becoming part of it.
He obviously was a very important part of Miami's art scene. Do you think he was responsible for this trend?
Well, he was. Miami-Dade College has had some wonderful art professors. And Bob came to the college in 1968 and was a professor, and then assumed the position of chair of the art department. But I grew up in Miami, but I came back in 75 to work with the library system, 76 to work with the library system. And when I came back, the colleges were doing wonderful things, and the library was doing wonderful things. We had an Artmobile program. That was my job. But I loved to go to the shows at North Campus. Bob Thiele and Elmer Craig and Charles Hashem. Wonderful work was going on up there. And then at South Campus, Robert Huff and Pete Kunsel and, Richard Williams. And so very, very strong and very, very important when people talk about, Art Basel and the beginning of arts in Miami. The colleges have a huge role, and as does the University of Miami and the Low Museum.
Now, people who would like to, witness Mr. Huff's work in person, I know that there's some museums that still showcase his work, as well as some public art displays. Which places can they go and see his work?
Well, we've just had a wonderful show at the DeLand Museum. Unfortunately, it's down now, but if people want to see Bob's work, there's a beautiful Art in Public Places piece that's part of. It's out by one of the police stations out in the Southwest. I think it's the South Dade Regional Police Station. There's a beautiful Art in Public Places piece at the Palmetto Metro Rail Station. If you go to the Broward County Airport or the Palm Beach Airport, there's beautiful work there. Right now, the Low Museum has got a permanent collection exhibition up, and there's a beautiful piece of Bob's work in that collection.
Well, Ms. Barbara Young, thank you so much for joining us in today's show.
It's been a pleasure.
And it is time for us to take our second break. When we come back, we're talking all things fashion. Stay tuned.
Welcome to the Miami Book Fair.
It's just so great to be around so many people who love books.
One thing I grew up realizing was the power of language.
Whoa! This is amazing.
I love comic books so much that is what I do for a living.
Welcome back to the show. Just Being Jackie is a stunning and inspirational nonfiction picture book about the life and style of the former First Lady and American icon Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis. This book is illustrated by Julia Dinos. I'm joined by its author, University of Miami professor, Margaret Cardillo. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, this is the second book you write about an icon who's very stylish. Why Jackie Kennedy Onassis?
Right. So my first book was about Audrey Hepburn, who, as you said, is an icon of style and grace and everything wonderful. And the idea had always been to do a little bit of a series on it, on iconic women, modern women. And Jackie just seemed like a very logical second book, a follow-up to the Audrey book, for different reasons, but kind of in that same ilk of iconic for various reasons, one being style, but also for strength and character and grace also. So
now you bring about fashion for this book, and it's a children's book. Do you think it's important to bring fashion at such a young age?
You know, the truth is that fashion takes up one page in the book. In the Audrey book and the Jackie book, they just happen to be women who had a very distinct style, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like the Audrey look and the Jackie look. Like, we know what that is. It became part of American lexicon. But the actual style of the fashion aspect of the book is very limited. It's much more about their lives and what they were like when they were children and young and formative, and then how that parlayed into what they became as adults and how they contributed to society and community as a whole and things like that. So it's actually a very small part. And the part in Audrey that has that, and Jackie, it's kind of like so secondary but complementary to who they are as character, who they are in their character, that I was okay with it.
Do you think that Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis changed the way that first ladies act and dress?
So I think it changed. You know, she certainly is one of the most beloved of the first ladies. So I think as far as being in the public eye, Jackie was actually a really private person. Mm-hmm. And anybody who knows, digs a little bit about her will know that. But I think though she seemed so comfortable in that role, she really craved, her private life and her privacy. But as far as her awareness of what it meant to be First Lady, her awareness of what a symbol meant in America, how to be an icon, that sort of thing, I think she really put a stamp on being First Lady that, yes, like I think future First Ladies have certainly looked to. They may not have emulated it, but they certainly know that what she was able to accomplish. I mean, before her, the White House really was not a home, and she made it a home. She made it a place that people were really proud to be in. It had representations from every state, or as many states as she could. Glass from West Virginia, and she found the historical Hayes desk and everything. She made it like really significant, and she knew the importance of symbols. And then she also knew how to throw a really great party, and she was the first lady to bring musicians and poets and people who weren't politicians into the mix with politicians to make it. She was so involved with the arts and so believed in that culture that she wanted to make it a part of the White House and a part of what America stood for. And I think that future First Ladies probably look to that as well.
Absolutely. And do you think that children can be inspired by that?
I think absolutely. Children, and I have two of them, so I hope that they learn also the lessons that I would like for children to learn from this about the importance of art and the importance of culture and things like that, of grace and and there's a part of it that is just being a strong symbolic person that I hope that they learn. Even if what they come off as might not be that people can be more than their appearances.
Absolutely. Julia Dinos is the illustrator of this book. Very beautiful. How did this collaboration come to fruition?
So I was so fortunate. Julia Dinos did my Audrey Hepburn book, illustrated the Audrey Hepburn book, and it just blew me away. My editor sent me her website, and I was like, whatever it takes to get Julia to do this,
you
please.
Will take it.
I will take it. She is so talented, and I feel like when I saw Jackie for the first time, it just like blew me away. I mean, she just stepped up her game in a whole new way, and it's gorgeous and evocative and beautiful, and I want to like live in her paintings.
Oh,
and when you feel that way about something, that means somebody really
is doing something right.
They're doing something right. So
now you are a professor and you teach screenplay. How different is it to teach screenplay and be a book writer?
Right. So I was driving here and I was like, I just got out of class and I have to switch my mindset to writing. They complement each other much more than you'd think. I started getting my MFA in writing, in fiction writing, and I switched, and I finished that, and then I got a second MFA in screenwriting. to help my fiction writing. Little did I know I was going to totally fall in love with screenwriting and really want to work in that field. And it's kind of where my profession has taken me. But I think that when I wrote the Audrey book, I wrote it in 3 acts, and that's kind of how you can write a screenplay. And so they're complementary. Though I do, the trick is to turn on and off the idea of showing in a film and telling and showing in a book. When I'm writing a screenplay, I'm like, I wish I could just explain this the way I would in a book. And when I'm writing the book, I'm like, I wish I could just show them an image instead of having to explain it. So I do feel the best, the best of both worlds, and sometimes it can be a little tricky, but mostly they complement each other.
And what advice would you give to students who would like to start their writing career?
Oh, yeah. So, I always say 2 things. There's 2 things that you must do as a writer. One is read. All writers read, and they're good readers, and they read a lot. And what I mean by good readers is they read a lot. It doesn't matter what it is. It could be magazines, it could be newspapers, novels, any comic books. Just keep reading. And the more you read, the better you write. And the second thing is, to practice. And I always compare it to athletes. A professional basketball player will take hundreds of jump shots because they have to practice that muscle. Your brain is a muscle, and you have to practice. Take your 100 jump shots every day, and you'll get better at your writing. Or 100 words every day, whatever it is, 100 whatever it is, sentences, and you'll get better at writing. I mean, it's all about exercising that muscle. Yeah.
That's right. Now, Margaret, thank you so much for joining us today. Unfortunately, we have come to the end of this episode. And remember that the 35th Miami Book Fair begins Sunday, November 11, and ends with a weekend street fair extravaganza beginning Friday, November 16, until Sunday, November 18. This is an event for the entire family. English playwright and author Ellen Benet once said, "A book is a device to ignite the imagination." So come and ignite that imagination by visiting the Miami Book Fair. I'm Athule Mbekeni, and thank you for tuning in. Until next time, have a great day.